Good evening. And welcome to a quiet and gentle walk through one of America's most whispered over stories. Tonight, we'll slowly explore the calm, distant echoes surrounding the life of H. Holmes. A name often linked to darker chapters of history, yet softened here into something reflective, measured, and easy to drift with, as you settle in. Allow the lights around you to dim just a little, let your breath fall into a slow, comfortable rhythm, and let the soft unfolding of history help your mind unwind, like pages turning in an old book. Together, we'll move through this story at a peaceful pace. Exploring the atmosphere, the era, and the quiet mysteries that grew around Holmes's world. Without rushing, and without tension, so, when you're ready. Let's begin our bedtime story tonight. America's first serial killer, H. Holmes. The story begins in the late 19th century, a time when the city of Chicago was growing upward and outward with a quiet sort of determination. Streets were filled with the soft rhythm of horse-drawn carriages, the steady clanging of streetcars, and the warm chatter of people who had traveled from all parts of the country, hoping to start fresh in a city full of opportunity. The air carried the scent of coal smoke, fresh bread from corner bakeries, and the earthy smell of the Great Lake. Drifting in from the shoreline, day by day, wooden sidewalks echoed with footsteps, merchants, travelers, workers, and families, all moving through a world that felt hopeful and full of possibility. It was during this moment in America's history, when Chicago was preparing for the grand excitement of the coming World's Fair, that a young man named Herman Webster Mudgett arrived in the city. He introduced himself simply, and politely, as Dr. Henry H. Holmes. To the people he met, he seemed well-spoken, neatly dressed, and calm in a way that made him instantly memorable. He bought small items from the local shops, greeted neighbors with a warm nod, and carried himself with an air of confidence that blended naturally into the rising energy of the city around him. Life in Chicago moved at a peaceful, predictable rhythm. Workers hammered new buildings into place, children played near wooden fences, and the soft glow of street lamps lit the nights with a gentle amber haze. No one, not the shopkeepers, nor the laborers, nor the families who passed him on the sidewalk, could have imagined that this quiet, polite doctor would one day become a figure surrounded by whispers, speculation, and one of the most mysterious reputations in American history. But in those early days, everything still felt ordinary, simple, unhurried. Holmes walked the streets like any other newcomer, blending into the easy motion of a city rising toward its future, and the story, for now, begins there, in a Chicago filled with gentle noise, soft hope, and the subtle stirring of a mystery still waiting far beneath the surface. The story begins softly, with the same slow breath a quiet city gives just before dawn. Imagine yourself stepping into the world of the early 1890s, a time when the United States still felt young, hopeful, and unsure of what it would one day become. The country was moving quickly, but life still carried long moments of silence, as if history itself paused between each chapter to observe the people living through it. This part of the story focuses on that world, America before the rush of the 20th century, when the streets were lit by gas lamps, when the nights were cool and open, and when a man named Herman Webster Mudgett quietly began drifting into the edges of public life. You may know him as H. Holmes, but for now, we will let his name drift in slowly, like a shadow stretching across an empty street. Before Holmes arrives, it helps to settle into the atmosphere of the country around him. The United States in the early 1890s carried a soft mixture of energy and uncertainty. Most families still lived simple lives, shaped by farming, railroads, and the slow expansion westward. Cities, however, were beginning to hum with the steady rhythm of change. Chicago, especially, was becoming one of the brightest symbols of the nation's transformation, a place rising from tragedy, rebuilding itself stronger after the Great Fire of 1871, and doing so with a quiet kind of confidence. The Mississippi River carried goods and hopes northward, rail lines brought travelers and workers every day, and the air carried the smell of smoke, fresh lumber, and damp earth after rain. People spoke of opportunity with gentle excitement. It was the kind of excitement that didn't shout, but whispered its way through neighborhoods and taverns, joining families at their dinner tables. Chicago was preparing for something extraordinary, the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition, a grand celebration of the 400th anniversary of Columbus's arrival in the Americas. Even before the fair opened, the idea of it hovered in people's minds like a bright lantern on a dark night. Architects, laborers, and planners worked with quiet determination, shaping the famed White City out of marshland and imagination. As you picture this world, imagine long wooden sidewalks, horse-drawn carriages rolling steadily down the streets, and storefront windows glowing warmly in the evening. The sound of a distant train drifting through the night might mingle with laughter from a nearby hotel lobby. Life moved at a slower pace, allowing every detail to linger. Into this shifting city walked a man who, on the surface, appeared entirely ordinary. He dressed neatly, spoke with practiced politeness, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who always seemed to know more than he said. For now, he blends quietly into the background of the story, no louder than a footstep on an empty road. We will return to him soon. At this early moment, he is simply another traveler arriving in a city full of restless dreams. There is a soft hint of mystery surrounding him, something that can't be explained with simple words. But mystery, like fog, becomes clearer as you walk deeper into it. Holmes arrived in Chicago during a time when opportunities felt endless. Anyone could start fresh here. Anyone could reinvent themselves. The city welcomed ambition, and the young man recognized it instantly. He began finding work, making connections, and exploring the neighborhoods that spread out like branches from the center of downtown. Buildings were still rising, and the sound of hammers echoing through the streets formed a familiar backdrop to daily life. People hurried from place to place, their boots scattering dust on the wooden planks beneath them. Yet even in all that movement, there was an underlying calm, the quiet feeling shared by a city preparing for greatness. If you walked beside him through the streets at that time, you would notice how ordinary Chicago seemed on the surface. Children played near the open markets. Street vendors called out their selections of fruit, bread, or warm roasted peanuts. There were barber shops, small pharmacies, and little shops filled with new household goods. Chicago was growing fast. But the warmth of community still found a place in the quieter corners of its neighborhoods. You might smell fresh bread drifting from a bakery, hear the clatter of machinery inside a small factory, or feel the cool breeze rolling in from Lake Michigan, yet within this peaceful landscape, Holmes moved with a different purpose, though few noticed anything unusual. People seldom looked beyond the immediate details of their day, the price of goods, the weather, the talk of new construction projects. Most believed what they saw. A well-spoken man with steady eyes and an agreeable nature fit in easily. And so Holmes began to settle into the city, slowly weaving himself into its busy rhythm without drawing too much attention. Still, if someone watched closely, they might have sensed something more beneath the surface. Not something frightening or dramatic, but something quietly out of place, like a single cold draft in an otherwise warm room. It was the feeling you get when someone smiles without fully meaning it, or when they speak just a little too smoothly. The kind of mystery that does not reveal itself quickly, but hangs quietly in the air, waiting. At night, the city became almost dreamlike. Gas lamps cast soft halos of light onto the sidewalks, and the sound of horses faded into a gentle murmur. Windows glowed with the amber warmth of Holmes settling in for the evening. In this calm atmosphere, Holmes walked back to his rented room, passing through the dim light as naturally as anyone else. There was nothing about him that would have stood out to the casual eye. He was simply one more figure moving through the quiet of a Chicago night. The city around him continued to expand. New buildings rose along the streets, and the anticipation for the World's Fair grew stronger every week. Newspapers shared excited updates, describing the impressive structures nearing completion. People imagined the crowds, the lights, the inventions, the music, and the global visitors who would soon walk the fairgrounds. Chicago felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for history to take shape. Holmes, meanwhile, began forming ideas of his own. He observed the city with a kind of patient curiosity, noticing the opportunities that came with constant construction, shifting populations, and the excitement of the fair. But we will explore those developments in the next part of the story. For now, stay with the gentle rhythm of this moment. Chicago before the fair, before the crowds, before the deeper shadows began to stretch behind the man who called himself H. Holmes. This chapter rests in the quiet space of the city's early preparation, in the soft glow of lamplight reflecting off rainy streets, in the muted conversations drifting from small shops. Holmes is present. But only faintly, like a figure painted in the corner of a large canvas, not yet the focus, not yet the subject of attention. The story has only just begun. And as it begins, it invites you to take a slow breath, to settle into the gentle atmosphere of a world both familiar and distant. As this part comes to a close, imagine the soft hum of a city at rest, the subtle mystery hanging just out of reach, and the sense that something is quietly shifting beneath the surface. The story will continue, unfolding like a long, peaceful walk deeper into Chicago's history. And as we move into the next part, we will step closer to the man behind the polite smile, beginning with a small twist, an unexpected idea that changed the direction of everything that followed. The story continues by guiding you deeper into Chicago, inviting you to walk its streets as they slowly come alive around you. Imagine yourself stepping into the city again, only this time with a closer look, closer to the sights, the sounds, and the subtle movements of the people who filled its neighborhoods. This part focuses on the quiet rise of a strange, polite man within that growing city, and how he began blending himself into its busy rhythm. The mystery surrounding him is still faint, like a distant shape forming behind a veil, yet it lingers softly in the air, encouraging you to listen a little more closely. Chicago in the early 1890s was a city eager to reinvent itself. After the Great Fire had reshaped its skyline, new buildings rose from the ashes with remarkable energy. Streets bustled with construction workers, merchants, and families searching for opportunity. The smell of fresh lumber mixed with the warm scent of coal smoke drifting from chimneys. The city was alive with ambition, and people carried that feeling in the way they walked, purposeful, hopeful, and quietly determined. In the mornings, the clatter of horse-drawn wagons rattled along the wooden streets, carrying goods toward the lakeshore and the riverside warehouses. In the evenings, those same streets softened under the warm glow of gas lamps, turning the busy city into a gentle landscape of shadows and amber light. Within this scene, Holmes found a place for himself. To anyone passing by, he appeared as respectable as any other young professional trying to make his way in the world. He dressed neatly, always in a tailored coat and polished shoes, and his voice carried a calm steadiness that made people feel at ease. He learned quickly that Chicago welcomed confidence, and he used that understanding with careful precision. Each handshake, each conversation, each polite smile was offered exactly when needed, no more and no less. You can almost picture him stepping into a small Chicago pharmacy for the first time, the smell of dried herbs and chemicals drifting in the air. Shelves lined with glass bottles reflected soft light like tiny lanterns. The shopkeeper might have greeted him warmly, assuming he was just another educated young man seeking work. Holmes blended easily into the scene, offering his credentials with quiet assurance. And for a while, that was enough. People did not question too deeply. They simply accepted him as he presented himself, yet beneath the surface, something felt slightly out of place. Not enough to alarm anyone, but enough to linger in the background like an echo that does not match the room it came from. Holmes' politeness seemed too precise at times. His eyes seemed to watch people a little too closely, as if measuring them. Still, he never gave anyone a clear reason to doubt him. Chicago was full of newcomers chasing new beginnings. And he was only one among thousands. Holmes learned the city in gentle steps. He observed the flow of people moving along the streets, the habits of local businesses, and the quiet corners where workers gathered on breaks. He noticed the empty lots still waiting for construction, the half-finished buildings, and the shifting neighborhoods shaped by the constant arrival of travelers. He understood that this was a city still in the process of defining itself, and that within such a place, a clever man could carve out a corner of his own without attracting too much attention. As days passed, he developed a habit of walking long distances through the city, as though studying it. His steps were steady, unhurried. If you walked beside him, you might pass rows of narrow houses with small front porches, their wooden steps creaking softly under the weight of families settling in for the evening. You might smell warm bread drifting from a bakery, or hear laughter spilling out of a nearby tavern. The city had a comforting rhythm, a predictable heartbeat that Holmes followed carefully. Eventually, he found a larger opportunity, a small plot of land near a street lined with promising new businesses. The neighborhood was growing quickly, attracting workers because of its convenient location near the future World's Fair grounds. Holmes approached the idea of building something there with the calm certainty of someone who had already been imagining it for quite some time. He purchased the property under one name, then hired builders under another. It was not uncommon for people to use different names for convenience, especially in a growing city. Most people simply shrugged and kept working. As the building began to rise, it looked no different from the many others being constructed throughout Chicago. Brick walls, wooden floors, and crisp new windows gave it the appearance of a hotel or a small apartment building. Workers hammered boards into place, the sound ringing out through the neighborhood like the steady beat of a drum. Holmes watched their progress with polite interest, offering directions with the same calm voice he used in every other part of his life. The building would later earn a darker reputation, but in this moment, it was simply an unfinished structure blending into the city's expanding landscape. Children walking to school might slow down and glance at it, curious about the new addition to their street. Local shopkeepers might pause to wonder who was wealthy enough to construct such a large building. Workers might gather on the sidewalk after long hours, wiping dust from their hands and talking quietly about how the structure would look once it was completed. Through it all, Holmes remained a background figure, present, but never too noticeable. If he walked past a neighbor, he tipped his hat. If someone offered him a friendly comment, he responded with a practiced smile. There was no reason for anyone to suspect that anything unusual was unfolding. Still, a hint of mystery clung to him like a faint scent carried on the breeze. It was the kind of mystery that grows slowly, the kind that begins with small questions rather than large ones. Why did he rarely share personal details? Why did he avoid long conversations about his past? Why did he seem to know exactly who to speak to and when to speak to them? These questions drifted quietly among the people who knew him, but never loudly enough to spark suspicion. Life simply continued. Chicago was far too busy preparing for the fair to dwell on small curiosities. As summer approached, the city grew louder with anticipation. Architects polished their grand designs, workers hurried to complete the fairgrounds, and newspapers filled their pages with hopeful stories of the wonders visitors would soon experience. Thousands of travelers planned their journeys, dreaming of electricity, exhibits, music, and cultures from around the world. The fair was meant to be a celebration of human achievement, a moment where Chicago would shine brighter than ever before. Holmes' building rose steadily through all of this. Room by room, floor by floor, the structure took shape until it became a notable part of the neighborhood. People walked past it every day, admiring its clean brickwork and polished windows. Few would ever suspect the quiet strangeness hidden within its walls, but that is a story for later. For now, the focus remains on the gentle rise of a man who moved through Chicago like a carefully drawn outline, filling himself in gradually as he stepped deeper into the city's bustling life. His presence was subtle, but it was there, woven into the fabric of the community, waiting for the moment when it would become something more defined. As this part of the story comes to an end, imagine the soft hush of a Chicago evening settling over the new building, the warm glow of street lamps reflecting off the windows, and Holmes turning the corner with quiet steps, disappearing into the dimming light. The mystery follows him, faint but persistent, like a whisper carried by the wind. The city around you seems to settle into a deeper calm now, as if it is preparing you to step further inside the strange world Holmes was quietly creating. Part 3 moves closer to the building that had taken shape in the heart of the neighborhood, a structure that would draw attention without ever revealing its true nature. This chapter focuses on the way Holmes shaped that building from the inside, arranging each hallway and each room with an intention seen only by him. And somewhere beneath the calm surface of his work, a soft, lingering mystery waits, almost like a single light left burning in an empty house. Imagine the building standing on a warm Chicago morning, the soft sunlight brushing its brick walls, giving them a gentle golden tint. The dust from nearby construction drifts lazily through the air, settling in tiny, quiet layers. Workers gather at the front steps, preparing for another long day. Their voices are low, thick with the heavy rhythm of early hours. Horses clop along the street, their hooves echoing softly across the wooden planks. Everything feels ordinary, steady, and predictable, but inside, the building feels different. Not unpleasant. Only unusual. As if someone has arranged the air itself with care, Holmes walked the halls often, his footsteps muffled on the unfinished floors. He ran his hand along the walls, not absent-mindedly, but thoughtfully. Each space he entered meant something to him. He adjusted the layout with small, precise changes, instructing workers to move a door slightly to the left, shorten a hallway, or add a wall that served no obvious purpose. Workers rarely questioned him. The city was full of unusual designs, and architects had their own styles. Whatever Holmes requested, they completed with quiet acceptance. For the listener, picture the long central hallway stretching forward with dim, filtered light falling in soft, narrow shapes on the floor. The air inside carries the smell of fresh plaster, new wood, and the faint metallic hint of tools. Dust glimmers in the sunlight like drifting flecks of gold. It is a peaceful scene, despite the strange arrangement of rooms that seem not to be connected in the way you might expect. Holmes kept a small notebook tucked inside his coat, where he made neat, careful sketches. Sometimes he paused near a doorway, studying its frame before adding a small mark to the page. Other times he stood in absolute stillness, almost as though listening to the building breathe. To an outside observer, it might have looked like the thoughtful planning of a businessman preparing for his new enterprise, and yet there was something in his silence that felt slightly out of place. Too focused. Too calm. Like a person who already knew exactly what he wanted and was simply waiting for everything around him to catch up. As weeks passed, the building gained more shape. Rooms that seemed ordinary at first suddenly appeared in unusual positions. Some walls were thicker than necessary. Some doors led nowhere. Some hallways curved just enough to feel awkward, as though designed to confuse rather than guide. Workers scratched their heads occasionally, then shrugged and returned to their tasks. Holmes paid them well enough, and the work, though strange, was steady. He oversaw everything with quiet precision. His presence in the building became as familiar as the echo of tools or the scent of sawdust. The workers began to speak of him in soft tones, never with suspicion, but with the mild curiosity reserved for someone who keeps too many thoughts tucked away behind a polite smile. Outside, the neighborhood continued to grow. Shops opened. Families moved into nearby homes. The sounds of the streets shifted with the rhythms of daily life, the laughter of children, the calls of vendors, the slow roll of wagons making their deliveries. The scent of warm bread from the bakery drifted over the streets in the afternoon, mixing with the pleasant earthy smell of fresh rain or the faint heat of the sun resting on the rooftops. Yet whenever someone passed the new building, they slowed just a little. They looked at it with interest, admiring its clean lines and sturdy construction. No one knew much about the man who owned it, though they had seen him enter through the front doors with that same precise step. Some thought he planned to open a hotel. Others believed he was building offices. A few wondered if he had a grander plan connected to the excitement of the upcoming fair. Holmes never corrected those guesses. He simply nodded politely and continued his work. Inside the building, as new walls rose and old ones shifted, a subtle feeling grew, one that couldn't quite be named. It was like a quiet hum beneath the surface, a sensation that something was being arranged with exact intentions. But the details were hidden, tucked behind freshly painted doors and carefully placed hallways. Holmes seemed to enjoy the privacy the building afforded him. He spent long hours wandering from room to room, sometimes checking on progress. Sometimes simply observing the way the light moved across the floors as the day passed. At times he would stand in an empty room for several minutes, the sunlight warming the edges of his coat as he took in the shadows forming gently in the corners. There was a kind of calmness in his routine, as steady as the movement of the city outside. Chicago continued preparing for the fair, and the area around Holmes' building grew even busier. Travelers began arriving early, exploring the neighborhoods and securing temporary lodging. The city felt fuller, more alive. The horses pulling carriages snorted softly in the streets, their breath visible in the cooler morning air. Street vendors called out their prices for freshly roasted nuts or warm pretzels. The sound of steam whistles from nearby factories drifted through the air in long, sighing notes, but inside the building, the world remained quieter. More contained. As though the walls were holding their breath, Holmes added new workers occasionally, carpenters, plumbers, laborers who found themselves hired for a few weeks before being let go. Some later said the work seemed unusual. Some said they felt confused by the strange layout. But at the time, no one questioned him. The fair was coming. Jobs were plentiful. And Holmes was always polite. He often paid in cash, counting each bill with calm, deliberate care. Workers appreciated that. It made him seem trustworthy in a practical, uncomplicated way. As you imagine him moving through one of the upper floors, picture the way the floorboards give a soft, familiar creak beneath his steps. The gentle sound echoes down the empty hallway, disappearing as quickly as it appears. A small window near the staircase lets in a ray of mild afternoon light, illuminating dust that dances and swirls in the stillness. Holmes pauses there, observing the quiet movement with a faint, unreadable expression. He traces his fingers lightly along the railing, the wood smooth beneath his touch. His eyes shift to a nearby room where the walls have recently been painted. The scent of fresh paint mixes with the softer smells of new fabric and polished metal. Everything looks peaceful, almost charming, but within that calmness lies the faintest whisper of something else, a question that has not yet revealed itself. Why does Holmes need such an unusual layout? Why does he linger so long in empty rooms? Why does he make changes no one else would think to make? The mystery remains gentle, unhurried, settling into the story like evening light slowly fading across a quiet neighborhood. As this part of the tale draws toward its end, imagine the building now nearly complete. The workers gather their tools and prepare to leave for the day, their voices drifting down the stairwell in soft, tired murmurs. Holmes stands by one of the tall windows, watching them walk out into the street. The golden glow of sunset fills the room, brushing the walls with a warm, restful hue. He remains there for a moment longer, breathing in the calm air, as if savoring the quiet he has created inside these walls. Outside, lamps flicker to life one by one, casting gentle pools of light across the street. The neighborhood settles into its nighttime rhythm. And Holmes, with a small, measured step, turns away from the window and disappears deeper into the building. Whatever he is planning, the shape of it is growing clearer in his mind, though still mysterious to those around him. The night had almost folded completely into silence by the time the campfires along the riverbanks thinned to small, flickering embers. The settlement, still new, still uncertain of its own future, rested like a quiet breath in the cool darkness. And in that soft hush, the world seemed to slow, as if waiting for something, holding its own anticipation at the edge of the dimly glowing horizon. It was in this hour before dawn that Aaron Burr found himself awake once more, sitting just outside the rough-hewn shelter that served as his temporary quarters. The air around him was still, carrying only the faintest sense of damp earth, wood smoke, and the lingering sweetness of crushed grass beneath the soles of 100 travelers. The sounds were hushed too, the distant croak of frogs hidden along the water's edge, the small shifting noises of horses tied for the night, and somewhere far off, the murmur of a river rolling steadily through the trees. He watched the faint glow of the coals at his feet, the light gently pulsing with each breeze, like a living heartbeat. He often found comfort in the quiet, though lately the quiet had begun to feel heavier. Somewhere behind the soft rustling of leaves, behind the usual patterns of wind and water, there was something else, something he couldn't quite name, not yet, but something that tugged gently at the edge of his awareness. a feeling like a curtain not fully pulled back, or a whispered message arriving only half-formed. But for now, he allowed the quiet to settle around him, letting the slow rhythm of the night bring his thoughts into order. The camp was a gathering place of sorts, halfway between a temporary outpost and a hopeful beginning. Travelers, surveyors, and hardy families chasing opportunity often passed through. Tonight, a small cluster of them slept close to their wagons, shadows tucked into blankets, faces softened by rest. A lantern flickered beside one wagon, unmanned but still lit, casting a soft golden circle on the ground that seemed to protect the sleepers within. Burr's mind wandered as he observed them. He imagined the stories each one carried, the reasons they had come, the hopes that nudged them forward, the weight of the past that followed quietly at their backs. Perhaps that was the part he understood most, the quiet weight. It was always there, familiar and patient. As dawn began its slow, gentle approach, the sky shifted from deep blue into a pale, powdered gray. No sharp edges, no sudden changes, just a smooth, calming transition that washed lightly over the landscape. The first birds began their soft calls from high branches, scattered like tiny instruments warming up before a quiet performance. Burr rose slowly, brushing dirt from his coat. He could feel the stiffness in his legs after days of travel, but he welcomed it. The land demanded effort, and in return it gave clarity, something he valued more than the comforts he had left behind. With each journey westward, each mile spent closer to open sky and rolling hills, he felt something loosen inside him, as though the world was gently reminding him of its size and the space still left to be explored. A few others in the camp had begun to stir. A man with a weathered complexion lit a small stove, coaxing a flame with practiced ease. A young boy sleepily led a mule toward the riverside, rubbing his eyes as he walked. And a woman near the tent stretched her back with both hands above her head, breathing deeply as the first warm streaks of sunlight crept over the treetops. They greeted Burr with quiet nods when they noticed him, gestures filled with the kind of trust that forms naturally among travelers sharing the same uncertain trails. Over a shared pot of warm grain and dried berries, Burr listened as the others spoke softly about the land west of the river, the possibilities it held, the roads still undefined, and the settlements just beginning to take root. Their voices blended with the morning breeze, creating a peaceful hum that filled the space where words might otherwise crowd. One man described a wide stretch of land beyond the forest, where the soil was rich and dark, perfect for planting. Another mentioned rumors of people mapping new routes along the river. Paths that might someday connect far-off places in ways easier to imagine than to accomplish. The woman beside Burr spoke with a calm confidence about the feeling of standing at the beginning of something, even if she didn't yet know what shape it would take. He listened quietly, offering small comments now and then, though he found himself less interested in the exact details and more drawn to the atmosphere these conversations created. The gentle thrum of imagination shared between people who didn't yet know where their own stories would lead. As the morning brightened, Burr prepared his small belongings, tightening straps on a leather pack and securing a rolled map to its side. The boats were readying too, lightly rocking in the water as though awakening from their own slumber. The river shimmered with soft reflections, each ripple catching the gold of early sunlight. Birds moved between branches, scattering shadows that danced across the riverbank. The keelboat assigned to Burr was sturdy, built for long travel through twisting waterways. Its broad hull rose slightly above the waterline, giving it a stable posture even when lightly loaded. A simple canvas shelter covered the center portion, shading crates of supplies and the few belongings that accompanied his journey. Several men were already aboard, checking ropes, straightening oars, and adjusting the long pole used for navigating shallow stretches. Burr stepped onto the boat with the steady ease of someone who had already grown accustomed to river travel. The wood under his boots was cool and slightly damp. The scent of water lilies drifted across the surface, mixing with the faint aroma of pine carried from distant shores. It was a peaceful place to stand, surrounded by an expanse of gentle movement and soft light. Before setting off, he took one last look at the small settlement behind him. Smoke rose from cook fires. Children chased each other between rows of wagons. A dog barked lazily as it lay in the shade of a large wheel. Life there was simple, perhaps temporary, yet full of that quiet determination that marked every frontier community. And as he watched, he saw something else. A young girl standing near the river's edge, barefoot on the cool mud. She held a small wooden toy in her hand, carved in the shape of a little boat. She seemed to study Burr's keelboat with quiet fascination, as if trying to imagine how it would travel along the long, winding river beyond the bend. When she noticed Burr looking her way, she raised her small hand in a soft wave. It was the kind of gesture made without hesitation or expectation, gentle and sincere. Burr returned the wave with a slight smile before turning back toward the crew. Soon, the poles pushed against the riverbed, and the keelboat drifted into the slow-moving current. The settlement gradually receded behind them, its sounds blending into the soft distance. The river widened, revealing long stretches of shoreline where reeds swayed in unison, moving with a rhythm that felt almost musical. For a time, the world was simply the sound of water brushing against the hull and the steady knock of the pole against submerged stones. Burr leaned against the side of the boat, letting the cool breeze touch his face. The land around him felt untouched, stretching far beyond what the eye could gather. Hills rolled gently beyond the trees, their shapes softened by distance. The sky above opened in a wide sweep of pale blue, carrying thin, wandering clouds that drifted without hurry. Yet somewhere in all that peacefulness, the earlier feeling returned, the faint pull at the edge of awareness, the sense of something waiting just beyond the curve of the river. It wasn't troubling, nor was it unwelcome. It was simply present, like the distant echo of a story not yet ready to be told. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the river's rhythm guide his thoughts. The water was steady, patient, moving forward with a certainty that felt reassuring. Whatever lay ahead, whatever new settlements, new conversations, or new landscapes awaited, he felt prepared to meet them with the same quiet calm he carried now. Hours passed this way, with the keelboat gliding smoothly toward its destination. The breeze warmed with the rising sun, carrying the scent of wildflowers blooming along the banks. The men spoke in low voices, sometimes sharing quiet laughter, sometimes simply working in companionable silence. The entire journey unfolded like a slow, gentle melody, and as the day drifted toward afternoon, a soft golden light began to settle over the water. Burr watched as it shimmered across the surface, creating long streaks that stretched toward the boat. Each reflection seemed to move with purpose, drawing the eye forward, toward whatever came next. There would be new challenges ahead, new conversations, new decisions to weigh carefully. But for now, in this moment, everything felt balanced. The river carried them onward at a calm, steady pace, and each bend in the water held the promise of something just out of sight. A quiet mystery lingered there, gentle but insistent, like a whisper of something still forming, and as the keelboat eased around the next curve, Burr felt the beginning of that whisper shifting into something more tangible. As though the next chapter of his path was finally stepping into view. The afternoon sun drifted slowly westward, softening into a warm, honey-colored glow as the keelboat continued its quiet journey downstream. The water carried them with a patient rhythm, each ripple catching the fading light like tiny lanterns floating on the surface. Everything around them, shorelines, distant tree lines, wide open sky, seemed wrapped in a gentle hush, as if the world had chosen to lower its voice for a while. Aaron Burr remained near the bow, one hand lightly resting on the railing as he watched the current slip past. The breeze had cooled since morning, brushing lightly against his sleeves and carrying with it a faint blend of river mist and cedar. It was the kind of air that soothed the senses. Neither too warm nor too cold, allowing the mind to drift freely between thought and quiet presence. He listened to the small sounds of the boat, the muted creak of wooden beams shifting with the water's motion, the soft splash of a pole dipping into the river now and then, and the distant calls of birds passing overhead. These sounds were simple, yet they wrapped around him with a comforting familiarity, an unspoken reminder that the river itself had become a temporary companion on his journey. The men aboard worked in an unhurried manner. Their movements were smooth, practiced, and respectful of the silence that had gently settled over the day. From time to time, one would speak in a low murmur, sharing a comment about the river's depth or a curve in the bank. Their voices blended softly into the air, never disturbing the calmness that surrounded them. Beyond the boat, the landscape unfolded like a long, slow painting. The riverbank stretched outward in graceful curves, covered in tall grasses that swayed like soft green waves in the approaching evening breeze. Patches of wildflowers dotted the edges, small bursts of white, yellow, and lilac petals that shifted gently with each movement of the wind. Further inland, clusters of trees formed living silhouettes against the sky, their branches draped with moss that hung low and brushed the trunks like strands of silver-green thread. Every now and then, Burr would catch sight of deer stepping quietly from the forest to drink from the shore. Their movements were careful, almost delicate, as if aware of the stillness around them and trying not to disturb it. They would glance toward the passing boat with calm, curious eyes before lowering their heads again to the water. There was something soothing about witnessing such scenes, moments of life continuing without urgency, carried only by the natural flow of time. Burr let these moments settle into him, as though they were small stones placed gently in the palm of his memory. As the keelboat drifted further west, the river began to widen. The banks grew low and marshy, filled with reeds that rustled softly whenever a bird or small creature passed through. The air thickened slightly with the scent of warm mud and blooming river plants. It was a scent grounded in the earth, quiet, steady, honest. For a long while, the journey continued in peaceful silence. Then, gradually, a subtle shift began to stir the air, the kind of shift one might not notice at first but feel instead, like a quiet stirring of the senses. The crew seemed to sense it too. One of the older men raised his head, listening closely to the faint, distant sounds carried on the breeze. Another leaned forward slightly, squinting toward the horizon where the sun had begun its slow descent. There was nothing alarming in the air, nothing sharp or sudden, but rather something curious. Something gently out of place, like a single note in a familiar melody that drifted just a little differently than expected. Burr noticed it as well. The feeling he had sensed earlier, the quiet pull at the edge of awareness, seemed to return now, soft but steady. It arrived not as a warning, but as a whisper. A suggestion that something unseen lingered just beyond their view, waiting patiently. He rested both hands on the railing, allowing the feeling to settle inside him without resistance. It was not the kind of mystery that asked for urgency. Instead, it invited curiosity, encouraging him to look a little closer at the world unfolding ahead. As the boat rounded a long bend in the river, the landscape shifted once more. There, stretching along the distant shore, stood a small collection of structures, simple cabins made from rough timber, a smokehouse, and what appeared to be the beginnings of a modest dock. The cabins were spread apart, not in a way that suggested disorder, but rather like seeds planted with intention, each one given its own space to grow. A thin line of smoke curled from one of the chimneys, rising in a lazy spiral toward the sky. The settlement was quiet, almost too quiet, as though its inhabitants were either away or waiting for something. A single canoe lay pulled onto the bank, half filled with tools. Suggesting work paused mid-task, Burr observed the settlement with a calm, steady gaze. It was still new, still in the fragile stages of becoming something more. And yet, despite its simplicity, there was an undeniable sense of purpose in its placement. Whoever had chosen this spot along the river had done so with thought and hope, trusting that the land would provide what was needed. The keelboat slowed as the men adjusted their pace, allowing the current to guide them gently past the settlement. Burr watched the shore quietly, and for a moment he thought he saw movement near one of the cabins, a faint figure beside a doorway, barely visible in the shifting light, but when he looked again, the figure was gone. Perhaps it had only been a trick of the sun, filtering through the trees in such a way that it created the illusion of a person standing there. Or perhaps someone truly had been watching the passing boats with quiet interest before stepping back into the shadows. He did not dwell on it. Instead, he let the question rest peacefully in the back of his mind, like a small stone placed beside a larger path, something to consider later. When the river was calmer still, as they continued westward, the sky deepened into shades of amber and pale rose. Clouds thinned into soft streaks that stretched delicately across the horizon. The world seemed to settle into an evening sigh. Easing the last warmth of the day toward the cool embrace of approaching night, the men lit a small torch at the center of the boat, its flame gentle and steady. It cast a warm glow on their faces, revealing the quiet fatigue that came from a long day of travel. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing bites of dried bread and cured meat, their words carried softly away by the breeze. Burr remained near the bow, watching the river's reflection of the sky shift from gold to soft lavender. He inhaled slowly, letting the cooling air fill his lungs. Everything around him felt unhurried. As though the river itself understood the importance of slowing down before nightfall, when the sun finally dipped below the horizon. Leaving behind a faint afterglow that lingered like a memory, Burr felt a calmness settle through him. The keelboat drifted gently, guided mostly by the current now. Fireflies began to appear along the banks, their small lights blinking softly among the reeds like tiny stars weaving themselves into the earth. The quiet mystery he had sensed earlier remained, but now it felt different, less like a whisper calling forward, and more like a presence resting comfortably nearby, waiting. As the first stars appeared overhead, the crew prepared to anchor for the night. They guided the boat toward a calm, shallow stretch of river sheltered by a curve of land. Here, tall trees stood close together, their branches forming a natural canopy that swayed lightly in the evening breeze. When the anchor touched the riverbed, the boat's movement slowed to a gentle stillness. The men arranged their blankets and supplies, speaking only in soft murmurs. The night seemed to deepen around them, settling like a soft cloak across the landscape. Burr stepped onto the nearby bank, allowing his boots to sink slightly into the cool mud. He walked a short distance to where the trees opened just enough to reveal a patch of sky. The stars shimmered there, faint but steady, forming shapes that felt familiar even in their distance. He breathed in deeply again, letting the air fill him with quiet gratitude. The river had brought him far today, farther than distance alone could measure. It had carried him through peace, through curiosity, through moments of gentle revelation. And tomorrow, it would carry him further still, but for tonight. Tonight was for rest. He returned to the boat, settling onto a folded blanket, his back against a crate warmed slightly by the torch. The river moved quietly beside them, lapping softly against the hull like a lullaby for travelers. As he closed his eyes, Burr felt that same gentle mystery hover at the edge of his thoughts, patient, steady, neither demanding nor urgent. It was simply there, waiting to reveal itself when the time was right, and in that comforting presence. Sleep slowly found him. The river continued its quiet journey in the darkness, carrying with it the promise of whatever lay just around the next bend. Waiting for dawn to bring it into view, for now, we simply drift here, in the soft embrace of night, at the end of this chapter. As the story prepares to turn gently toward the next part, where a small twist begins to take shape. Ready to be discovered. If you are still awake, allow your breathing to slow, feel the weight of the day gently slipping away, let the quiet echoes of this story settle softly in your mind, the roads, the travelers, the mysteries. All fading into calm silence. You are safe. You are resting. And you deserve this peace. Close your eyes a little heavier now, and drift into a deep, restful sleep. Good night.